Okay, hello everyone. Let's see. Up here we have Hussein and I'm Eric. We work on the geodatabase team. We've worked on the geodatabase team for some while. How long have you been here, Hussein?
I joined Esri in 2015, right when we started the utility network project. Maybe like a little bit 2 years after that.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, that was like a very interesting time in that area.
Yeah, okay. So Hussein's been here 9 years. He's one of the newbies on the team. I joined in '97 after grad school, and I've been here ever since. It's been a lot of fun here at Esri. We're going to be talking about version management, specifically branch versioning. We're not going to be talking about traditional versioning. How many of you in the crowd are using branch versioning right now?
Nice.
Oh, okay. Good number. Let's see, other questions. How many of you have seen this presentation before? Okay, excuse me. It's a really beautiful day in Palm Springs. What are you doing? Okay, anyway, we're gonna be taking you through version management, do some demos, have some banter, just talk about stuff. Ask reasonable questions and all that. Does everyone have a seat here? There's always the chef's table seat up here if anyone wants. They're more than welcome to join us up here. No one's ever taken me up on that though.
I can move my bag.
Yeah, okay, well let's get to it. What are we gonna talk about? We'll do a basic overview, tell you some of the motivations behind why we created the second versioning model. We'll go through and look a little bit at the tables that are in the background and go through a couple example queries that are representative of the type of SQL queries you may see flying through your system when we're doing moment queries and whatnot, either in default or a branch. It might be interesting for you. We're going to talk a little bit more about the version management server and go through the REST APIs, and there'll be demos and stuff like that. And we'll talk also a little bit about the managed SDK that's available in Pro. Okay, so that's the basic agenda today. So what is branch versioning? Well, it's our new versioning model. I guess new is kind of relative. It's our second versioning model. And it was developed purposefully to support a service-based architecture. Remember, about 10 years ago, we started pivoting pretty hard at Esri towards service-based implementations. Why is that? Client-server had worked so wonderfully for us for the preceding umpteen years. Well, it comes down to what kind of client apps do you want to have in your system? Of course, you want to have a great desktop app like ArcGIS Pro, but then maybe you want to run in the mobile space, okay? Maybe you want to be able to connect to services from mobile devices, or maybe you want to be able to take things offline completely and periodically synchronize them with your services, through services. Maybe you want to have web apps. You want to have thin client web apps in your organization. That's a deployment option as well with a service-based architecture. Maybe you want to say, hey man, it's all hosted, it's all online. I want to use ArcGIS Online. Well, it's all the same basic architecture, and a service-based architecture allows us to get there. And that's why we did that. And the project that Hussein and I have been working on for the past 10 years or so, the utility network was the first new data set type in the geodatabase that was designed from first principles to be services-based. It actually doesn't run in multi-user client-server mode. Everything is through services. And that was great because it helped us push and understand and truly refine our service-based architectures, because if we couldn't support, the utility network is a very complex information model. And if we could support it there through services, we could support everything. So it was served a very important role. A lot of headache. I lost all my hair on the project. It was terrible, but we got it done. And we're continuing to work on it pretty hard right now. So again, sorry about that. Branch version data sets are read-only if you are connected in client server through direct connect. You can't edit them through client server mode. And it's based upon the existing capabilities of traditional versioning, namely it supports multi-user editing, and you do get your edit isolation in your child version. That's why you do versioning in the first place. Now, why do we do it? Well, it wasn't just a make-work project. Of course, every software developer likes to take their old stuff and throw it away periodically and just do it again, but better somehow. Well, what really motivated us, aside from that, is we wanted to have all the edits written to a single table. We wanted to have a simpler table structure. Okay, that was one motivator. That allowed us to have simpler versioned queries. When they're simpler, well, the database on the back end can often be more performant, more scalable, consuming less resources. Okay, got a little bit smarter there. So simpler queries, better throughput. Also, because of the simple table schema, you no longer need to worry about compress that you did with traditional versioning, okay? You don't need to reconcile all versions to default on a periodic, nightly, twice a day, whatever basis in order to get a full compression of your system and maybe optimal performance. You don't need to do that anymore. Usability, of course, you can directly edit a version default via Pro, or any version via the REST API without actually spinning up an edit session, okay? You can do direct edits there. Multiple versions can be posted in parallel. And one of the things we also now support that we never did with traditional versioning is partial posting, where you take a subset of the features that you've modified in your version and you post them to default. It's not an all or nothing. You can have subsets, okay? Now, we don't support all dataset types yet. One of the things that our team is working on, Hussein, myself, others, is partially posting utility networks, network data. That's a tricky problem. It's still much a work in progress, but it'll get there. Archiving is built in. You have the ability to track deleted features, and it also is basically a temporal system because we have all these timestamps. You can do moment queries in the past. It really does have a temporal capability.
Yep, I'll be showing those moment queries. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, they're very, very useful.
Yep.
Conflict management's gotten a lot better. This is actually really cool. This was kind of an unintended side effect of the work when we started branch versioning. This was not something that we were initially planning on, but we found out we could support it. And that is that when you do a reconcile, we detect all the conflicts and we persist the appropriate metadata, the appropriate data that allows you to then examine the conflicts at a later point in time. You don't have to examine them right away. You can examine those conflicts across multiple edit sessions of Pro or through your web app or whatever. That's really nice. Maybe you're doing something that requires a lot of editing and it's all kinds of chaos has erupted, and you need to think very carefully about that reconcile. What happened? What are the conflicts?
Yeah.
Maybe you want to ask a couple other smarter people questions. Hussein, what should I do? Parent or child, I don't know. What do you want to do?
The funny part about this story, like I have a story to tell about this exact problem. Maybe back in 2012, I used to work in an electric utility back in Bahrain, my home country. And one of the most problematic things, the shift ends at 2 o'clock back then. So at the end of the day, the administrator will sit there and start reconciling all versions. And he cannot leave until he resolves all the conflict. So imagine how he cannot close ArcMap. The moment he closes ArcMap, his work is done. So imagine the nightmare.
Yeah, that is the worst job ever. In any event, so you can take these things, you can open up the conflict management dialog, and you can look at all your individual conflicts across multiple sessions. Not only can you do that, you can tick them off and say, I've reviewed this conflict. I'm done with it. I've either replaced with the current version or the target or the common ancestor, and it retains that information. You can also add review notes. Say I'm working the night shift and I say, Hussein, I want to go with the child version because of blah, 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 blah. Then Hussein, when he's on the day shift, he can come in and he can look at my note and he can review it and say, no, he's completely wrong. We're going the other way, okay? So that's one thing that's very cool. Now, when you do a subsequent reconcile, all the previous stuff is gone, okay? So don't do multiple reconciles in a row and expect the stuff the conflicts that were detected during the initial reconcile in the notes and stuff that you made to persist.
We'll warn you though. We'll tell you that, hey, your conflicts will be gone if you
don't do that.
Yeah, so.
Okay. Okay, here's a little visualization showing the REST API through the version management service, and you can see the various different operations and resources and all the rest. That should be pretty familiar to you. But the interesting point here is ArcGIS Pro, a very rich, heavy editing client application. Everything it's doing with versioning is through this REST API. There's no secret backdoor. We're not tunneling around. We're not doing some sleight of hand under the covers. When you're editing in Pro, everything is hitting this API, plus other services, of course, as well, like the feature service or utility network service or whatever. But from a version management perspective, everything is exposed through REST that you need. It's everything we need, so we're good with that. Okay? People like that.
Yeah, I know, right?
People obviously like
Let's go, yeah.
Okay, similarities. They both have version managers, they both have a ribbon, they both have GP tools. You have similar operations. We tried to keep the same name, same metaphors and all that. Didn't create new abstractions. Create, alter, delete. You can set the access type. You can do undo, redo, and have editing isolation inside child versions. Do reconcile, you can do post. You can, of course, detect and resolve conflicts. They're both basically the same there. What are some of the differences? When you create a version, in branch versioning, it's only through services. We don't support grandchild versions in branch versioning, okay? We don't. Editing is, again, through services. If you do connect in client server, which of course you can, it'll be read-only, okay? It's an insert model that allows us to have the temporal support, the ability to track changes over time by default. The default version itself does not support undo, redo. There's no built-in capability for that. In the child version, we rigorously enforce only one editor at a time in a child version. However, you can have multiple readers, okay? But only one writer, one editor. A reconcile is not undoable, and like we were talking about before, you can persist your conflicts. So the poor guy that you worked with can go home at a reasonable hour. And then you can alter your version ownership to support various different funky QA workflows. What would be an example of that, Hussein? Can you point to a good example?
Of what exactly?
Of needing to alter your version ownership to support QA workflows.
Well, so usually if I want to review some work that you did, Eric, right? So you created your work and I want to review it as your supervisor. So one way to do that is ask you to make your version public, right? And ask you, hey, exit Pro, please. And then I will log in and then change to your version and review it. That's one way to do it, right? But it acts like you have to make your version public, which is slightly a little bit dangerous. Someone can get in and change it and do things that they're not supposed to do. So for one workflow of changing the owner is that, all right, I'm done. My version is private. I'm going to change the owner from myself to my supervisor. And just like that, it shows up in his or her list. So they can change directly to their private version and review their workflow. So that's one use case of why would you want to change the owner.
It's quite reasonable. especially if you're really secret and stuff.
Yeah, right.
Okay, very good. Let's see. One of the differences, of course, well, branch versioning is available throughout the platform. It's exposed through services. Also, some of the newer data set types that we've been developing over the past decade are only available through branch versioning. First out of the gate was the utility network. You can't run it on top of traditional versioning. Nope, has to be branch versioning. The same thing with our parcel management technology, as well as things such as roads and highways. So this is a purposeful shift that we're doing internally because of all the advantages that we see with branch versioning over traditional versioning. We're not even taking the time with our new development, new data sets being developed to make them run on traditional versioning. We're trying to encourage people to move to the new model, okay? Setting it up. Well, okay. It's kind of what you would expect. Get your workspace, set your workspace connection to use branch versioning. You gotta check that box, okay, on the connection properties. Your data set has to have a global ID. It has to be editor tracking enabled. Then you can register it as versioned. After that, connect to the portal as a user with publishing privileges. And from there, you can then share it as a web layer. And when you do that, also select the version management server capability that you'll see in the share as web layer dialog. Okay? That's the basic workflow. Now, what have we been keeping ourselves busy with on top of branch versioning after it was initially released? I don't know, 10-ish years ago, 8-ish years ago, sometime in there. We can see it, things like column level conflict detection, filtering fields and conflict detection, fine-grained privilege administration, differences like what Hussein was talking about, differences between moments on default was supported at 10.9. Let's see, we supported non-spatial objects at 10.9, edge and junction objects, asynchronous reconcile and post through services when you have big jobs. And then lately, cutting to the chase, the past release was 64-bit object IDs and integers, and the new date time fields that have been exposed through Pro, okay? That's what we've been doing to branch versioning, in addition to just lots and lots of performance, quality, and scalability enhancements that are just ongoing. Is all of that true?
Yeah, never ending seems.
Yeah, never ending. People, that's the one thing. People are never satisfied with performance. You can always make it faster. Or as they say, stop making it so slow. Okay, let's take a little peek at how the queries actually work. This is kind of representative, and it kind of will give you an idea for what's going on. Not all the details are here, but all the interesting details are here. So, when we look at the branch versioning, the main tables related to branch versioning, here they are. And you can see some of the key relationships in different colors. You have the SDE branches table, you have the branch tables modified, as well as the multi-branch tables. And then you have the branch locks table, as well as user tables. User tables are things like object classes, feature classes, real end user data. And these are all the fields and how they kind of relate to each other. It's all color-coded and fancy and stuff like that. Now, let's go through a little example. Let's say we had a feature class represented on the left. It's a pretty simple feature class in the northwest corner. Single feature, one object ID, and it does have geometry, but it has no attributes. It's a very simple feature class, okay? When you go and when you branch enable it, we're going to be adding some additional columns onto that field that we manage. Things such as the branch ID, the from date. Is this a delete record? What is the archive OID? The unique row identifier. These are things that we will add on to any feature class or object class or other system maintained tables that are enabled as branch versioning. Now, here's an example. We're in default, branch 0. Branch 0 is by definition default. We're going to show the insert model. Here we're going to say we're starting off with 4 features in default. Okay? We go and insert feature 5. You can see feature 5 being added. We're going to update feature 3. What's interesting, we didn't delete any row, the pre-existing row object ID 3. We just added a new one with a different from date, same branch ID. Update 4, same as we did with 3. Let's say we want to delete record 4. We create another record with a different timestamp, but we set the isDelete flag to true. That represents a delete of object ID 4 in the system. IsDelete is set to true. Now, here's a query. Here's a representative query. A branch moment query on default. Okay? Let's talk through this. Now, this is, as I said before, not full details. We've gone and removed some of the stuff that can get very confusing or is basically unimportant to understand how this system works. Okay? So, let's say we have our default version and the table's represented on the right. We can see there are 5 features in default and a 6th feature is in branch ID 10, some other version. So, how does this thing work? How do you tease this apart? Well, one thing that we're going to be doing, you'll see row ID, we use a row ID cursor, and that's basically to allow us to avoid instantiating the entire row when we're executing these analytics. Some of these tables can be extremely wide. We don't want to instantiate the whole row. We want just the pieces that we really need. So we're using a row cursor here. Now, that being said, let's first, in order to figure out what the current moment query for default is, well, let's first get all the rows where branch ID is 0. Remember, branch ID 0 is default. So you can see the ones that are highlighted on the right. We're not getting the one from version with branch ID 10. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually partitioning, or that's the database term, we're grouping, essentially grouping all the records by their object ID in descending date order. And then for each of those records, we assign a row number, column RN, to every one of those things that are grouped and put in descending order by object ID. Okay, now let's see, I think the next graphic highlights that a little bit better. Yeah. Partition by object ID, so we can see there's only one record corresponding to object ID 1, but there are 2 records corresponding to object ID 3, and 3 records corresponding to object ID 4. And if you look at, say, object ID 4, those 3 records, they are in descending order of the from date. Okay? And that's where how we assign the row numbers. Now it's kind of awkward to say that because descending means from the top, so it's kind of like backwards.
Yeah, exactly.
When I say descending, think about the most current date as being record 1, row number 1.
Yeah.
The next older is being row number 2, then one after that, row number 3. So although it looks like it's ascending in this tabular representation, it's actually descending inside the system and as we're assigning the row numbers. Could we be more confusing with this slide?
I'll try next time.
Okay. We're working on it.
The reason we're doing this is we want, the goal of this query is to get the most latest representation of each row. And what is the meaning of latest is basically that field, GDB from date. As Eric showed, some object IDs here might have been updated multiple times. So you will have older representation, older and older, but you really want the latest and greatest one. That's why we order by the date, and he's gonna explain it next. We're gonna pick row 1, and row 1 is basically the latest, and that's the trick we're playing.
Oh, that was the big reveal.
I know, spoiler alert.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so we gone and we ordered them. We're looking at object ID 4. Okay, it's ordered in descending order. That's how we assign the row numbers. Then from there, the where row number equals 1 and is deleted is false. So that filters out object ID 4 because it's deleted. Row number 1 for object ID 4, the next to bottom row, is a delete. We deleted that thing at 7:10 in the morning on February 5th, 4 years ago. Okay, so that's why the result of this query on this little toy data set will be 4 records. Okay, that's the result. So, using this information and how we talk through it, you can then do your intercepts, look at the SQL that's flying back and forth. You can look at it, through Fiddler, whatever you want to do. Because again, it's going through REST, so you can pick it up in Fiddler. And you can see it, and then if you really want to tease apart that query, you'll have better insight now as to how it works. Okay. Let's see, here's another example. Okay, we have, we're gonna do it in a branch rather than in default. Here, let's say we have 5 features inside default. Then we're gonna go create another branch, okay, another version. We'll call it branch 1, BR1, has branch ID 1, okay, and we set the creation time, branch moment, and ancestor moment when we create the branch. Then from there, inside the branch, we're gonna be doing some editing. Okay, create feature 6. Okay, fine, you see that being added. Update feature 3. Insert feature 7. Update feature 7. Delete feature 2. Update feature 5. Insert feature 9. Delete feature 9. Okay, that's what our database looks like. We ran out of space inside the PowerPoint, so we'll say those are all our edits. Now, taking that, we put it into a different table, and let's go through and do a current moment query for the branch. A query similar to what we just did, but in a branch rather than in default. So it gets a little bit more complex, but you'll see it. It's no big surprise. This is the query. Okay, very, very similar, but slightly different, but the same patterns. So both of these filters that we have on there, and there are 2 primary filters, are access paths to the data. On the top, we see branch ID 0, on the bottom, branch ID 1, essentially default and the version we just created in this tabular representation. So of course, we start off and we apply the analytic to each access path, okay? So we'll start seeing things being grouped together, things being sorted together, row numbers being assigned, this, that, and the other. Now, in this example, between this slide and this slide, object ID 2 is being removed from the candidate result set because, as you can see towards the bottom in the gray, it was deleted in my branch. Okay, and the from date is greater than it was in default, okay? That's why. 2 was deleted, so we remove it. The next thing we do is object 3 is being filtered out, the top 2 most instances that were in default because we've also edited them in the branch version, okay? And the from date there is greater in branch for object ID 3 in the branch. Object 4 is similarly filtered out because it was deleted. Object 4 was deleted in default. Okay, so we filter that out. Object 5 is being filtered out because object 5 was edited in the branch. And objects 7 and 9 are also being filtered out. 7 is being filtered out because we've updated it, we inserted it, and we updated it in the branch, so only one of the 2 rows remains. And then object ID 9 is filtered out entirely because we inserted it, then we promptly deleted it in the branch. So this is the result of that query using that example. So we've combined both default as well as a branch for this moment query. So again, you're seeing a pattern here. It's a pattern. And so when you go back home, and if you really care to look at it, you'll be able to recognize this pattern, and maybe you'll have better luck at trying to figure out what squirrely stuff is actually going on through the REST API. Okay? Do you want to talk now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you want to?
That's perfect, actually.
Okay.
That's a good slide to go. Let me talk about this slide a little bit, and then jump to the demo, because the demo, coincidentally, is all about services. So what we're looking at here is the diagram of most of our capabilities at the server side. So we're looking at the diagram ArcGIS Enterprise, with the features service being the major one, and utility network service is another component. There's another capability diagram. Version management service, that's the one we're going to explore, that green box to the right, second from the right, and then validation service. So if I am all the way up in Pro, I communicate to a local version of the geodatabase. We call it the feature service client. And that, in turn, will take my query, my action, whether it's an edit, a query, an identify in Pro, and then translate it into this orange arrows, which is a JSON HTTP request. Well, it's an HTTP request of type JSON, at least in the request payload. So that goes, if it's a query, it goes to the feature service box, right? And then that gets deserialized. Of course, I missed to talk about serialization, which happened all over there, to serialize things into JSON on wire transfer, then send it across the network, reach it there, deserialize it. Now we understand what's the request in, and then we directly talk to the database, right? In this case, the SDE workspace, though, whether this is SQL Server, Oracle, SAP HANA, and whatnot. And that query might or may not go to the actual database based on if we have caching going on. And then it goes back all the way and then gets serialized again as a response. So the amount of time we spend in this gray box is the request processing latency, if you will. So we send back the response, and then again, Pro in this case, or any other client like a web JavaScript, will deserialize the response and then either present it on the screen, put it in a table, or do whatever it wants. Right? So that's basically it. So if I want to send, for example, a request to create a version, very similar. So we send a request to create a version, or a request to validate the utility network. It goes through the exact same steps. It's just the service or the capability changes.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's go through that. I think mine is number 3. Right? Yeah, all right. So here we have Pro. I'm not going to go through the publishing. I'm just going to show you, since kind of Eric had a slide that shows how we publish that. But essentially, you would connect directly to your database. And there's this nice option that says, OK, branch. Right? If you have that option as a branch, then we know that this workspace is actually a branch workspace. It tells us it's like a toggle in a sense that tells us to switch between old versioning and new versioning. Right? And then we have the classes. Of course, we have to register those classes as branch version to add all the columns that Eric talked about. Add it to the map, and then you would go share a web layer, and then you would make it feature service, and that's when you go to configuration, you'll see this new option. It will light up, version management. Do you want to enable it or not? In 3.3, this is enabled by default. Once you have branch versioning, it will be enabled by default. In 3.2 and older, I have a 3.3 client here, but in 3.2 and older, you have to actually check that box. And we've seen users forgetting to check that box and says, oh, why is my stuff not working? So after you hit publish, you'll get something like this. Right? That's a service. This service called Dev Summit 2024 has 2 classes, 1 class and 1 table. So if I click on this guy, I go to the capability, you see that the version management is checked. Right? And we can go, this is all the capabilities, what we can do through this service. You can create a version, delete a version, do diagnostics, post, reconcile, and all of this stuff. So if we go into this, you will be presented with the main page of the version management service, and which lets you show all the capabilities that this version of enterprise supports. Mine is 11.3, and all of these capabilities actually supported. So if you go back in an older one, you'll see fewer and fewer versions. This list is actually very critical because we query it when we first start Pro, and it tells us what capabilities this server supports. So I can disable and enable things as needed, right? Like, for example, async reconcile is, I believe it was introduced in 11.0, if I'm not mistaken. So if I'm connected to a 10.9.1, you cannot do async reconcile from Pro. It will be disabled, right? That's a way to give us, as a client, tell us what.
Yeah. Very quickly, this is a pattern that you'll see across all of our services, like Hussein is showing. This supports foo or supports bar, GAC, FUM, QUX, whatever. That's how we take an existing REST API, the initial release, and we start adding new functionality to it. Absolutely. That's only available through newer clients. Older clients don't have the built-in, say, ArcGIS Pro doesn't have the ability at, say, 10.9 to be able to do an asynchronous reconcile. Mm-hmm. So, you know, this is a way that the older clients and then the newer clients can also make sure that, hey, I'm connecting to an enterprise database, an enterprise service that is at the level that I'm hoping for. I may be using Pro 3.2, but maybe I'm sitting on a 10.9 enterprise instance that doesn't have that capability. So then the 3.2 Pro will not show that as something you can do.
Right, because if it did, and we had some bugs that Pro didn't listen to these capabilities, it will show a button that is like a shiny new button, and users will click it, and a request will be sent. And guess what will happen to the server? It's like, what is this? The server sometimes can freak out and return interesting results. And that will get you in a very interesting spot. You know, it's like, because what is this bug exactly, right? So I'd like to go now to the query REST endpoint, to the feature service REST endpoint. And specifically, I'm going to go to my simple table. Okay? It's a table, right? Has a few fields. There's some properties. I'm interested in first, let's start with the query, right? I'm going to query this table on default. So that is 1 = 1 means give me everything. And I'm going to go ahead and ask you to return only the object IDs. And geodatabase version, I'm going to say is DE default. That is, query the default version and execute that query that Eric showed. You know, that current moment query. I mean, this moment, right now, what is in that table? And if I do post, no records, fine. I don't have any records on this table on default. I did that on purpose. Now, I'm going to go to the version management. I'm going to create a new version. Okay? I'm going to call it dev summit, public. And that is another operation on the version management server that allows us to create a new version on default, on this service, essentially. Okay? So when the operation succeeded, you got a version name, and we got a GUID. This becomes a very critical, component in identifying uniquely that version. Yeah? So we have the branch ID, which is the version ID. We have the creation moment, modified moment. I'm going to talk about that in a minute right now. So let's go ahead now. I'm going to the versions REST endpoint, and I'm going to paste that GUID that I just got. And I had a backlog item. Hopefully we can fix it to make this as a link, Eric. So that if I click on it, you take me directly, so you don't make me copy them.
Too convenient.
Too convenient.
Too
okay.
Convenient.
I knew it.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I think so. Because I've been copying and pasting these codes. All right.
Good idea.
All right. So when we are here at the version info page, That version tells you all the information about it. This is the creation moment of the day of that version, and this is the modified date, or we also call it the current moment of that version. And as you can see, they are the same because you created the moment and you never touched it. You didn't do anything to this version. Now, what I want to do is, hopefully you and admin.dev, let's remember that, and I'm going to go to the simple table, and I'm going to go to the apply edit payload. Okay? And I'm going to create a new row, but in my version. So to do that, this is a trick I just learned half an hour ago that you can do this. So if you do that and you don't have any not null fields, this actually works. We'll create.
Are you serious?
Yeah, of course.
I just learned a new trick.
That will make two of us. Okay.
That's cool.
So if you do that, and I want to ask the apply edit to actually return the edit moment. Return, if I make an edit, we get back a new moment of time when that edit got created, that GDB from date Eric showed. I want that returned because I'm going to use it. Okay? And what else? If I left this empty, it will use the default. It will create that row on default. I don't want that. I want this to be created on the version. So unadmin.dev, remember that's our version name. What else do I need to do? I think that's it. And I hit apply. And you see that it worked. I got this moment, and I got this global ID, and we got object ID 402 here. Now, I want to go back and to the version properties here. And I'm going to refresh. Notice what changed. I don't know if you noticed.
Ooh, yes.
The current moment has been updated. That means whatever we did actually translate to start edit, make an edit, save edit. That's what happened. When I do an apply edit like this without, in development, we call it long transaction. I think we're not supposed to use that publicly. Yeah. But essentially what we're doing is we're creating a short edit, short transaction, where we're creating an edit and we're immediately saving it. That's what it is. Right? And I'm going to demonstrate how do we do an undo, redo kind of a situation, long transaction. So we actually saved that. That means if I go back and I say, instead of querying, that's our queryless endpoint. Instead of querying default, let's actually query default again. Nothing. Expected, because we didn't touch the default, we touched the version. So let's go back to the version, and instead of default, we do unadmin.dev. That's my version. And if I query, I get one row. Now here's the interesting part. I'm going to go back to my version, and I'm going to take this moment, which is the current moment. And I'm going to say, query this version on this historical moment. Right? What do you guys think will happen? How many rows I'm going to get? Shout out, just any number. See, either read.
7.
That's the worst. Okay, I'm going to get 1 because what really happened when I didn't specify this is give me the latest moment. And the latest moment is the current moment. Okay? So with and without, I get 1 row. But now I'm going to ask you a question. What if I go back to the inception date of this version and I say, query that? How many I'm going to get?
7.
You're confusing the audience. We're going to get none. Now,
What if you took that moment
Yeah.
and you subtracted 1 from that very large number?
Okay, let's do that. So let's explain what happened here. I took the current moment as the moment of the creation of the version. And remember what happened there when we created the version? The table didn't have any rows. So when I said to the REST endpoint, query on that moment, there was nothing to return. And that's the correct result. So what we just showed is a query in the past, effectively. That's exactly what we did. So let's do what Eric wants to do, and hopefully nothing breaks. If I paste this is the current moment, so it should give you 1 row. but I'm going to subtract 1 millisecond. Is that millisecond? I think that's a millisecond.
That's 2 milliseconds.
Did I? Okay. Now it's not going to work. Yeah. So I went back.
Well, what if you only subtract 1 rather than 2? We're just doing some testing of the code up here. Oh,
One.
Very good.
Yeah. See, the moment you go even by 1 millisecond, that row is gone. Right? Understand me? So, all right. So we showed moment queries, and we showed this. Let's do session management. And to do sessions, we need to talk about long transactions, which is the ability to create a session, but I'm just experimenting in my version. I'm creating features, but I don't want them saved because I might discard them. How do you do that? Because all what we showed is a save always approach, right? So that's not a good way for all workflows. So what we're going to do here is show what we call long transaction. So to do that, we need a GUID. Right? So I need to go to online GUID generator and then use that.
What happens if you use that other GUID you already had?
Nothing happens, but I didn't want to
test the software.
That's funny. No, it will work, but if you saw me do that, then it's like, oh, does that GUID has to?
Use the same GUID for everything. Sorry.
Nothing happened. Definitely works, right? I just didn't want to show a bad example, Eric. Thanks. So this is a GUID. So you generate a random GUID and you call it, hey, I want a new GUID. I want a new session. And that's my global unique identifier or universally unique identifier, UUID. Right? And I say, hey, I want to start reading on this GUID. And when I do that, I just created what we call in database speak shared lock on this version. That means, hey, I'm about to read. We usually do that in order to ensure that shared and exclusive locks are opposite of each other, where if I want to ensure that nobody's changing this version. Right? So I acquire a session shared lock through start reading, and by doing that, nobody can edit this version, right? Unless they have also a shared lock that they can upgrade, like I'm about to do right now. So now I am going to the version resource again, taking my read lock, and I'm gonna promote it to what is it called? The exclusive lock or write lock, right? So now we have this GUID. We are starting editing. That's exactly what Pro does, by the way. We're calling start reading and it's calling start writing or start editing. And hopefully in future releases, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're gonna not require you to call start reading.
Right.
Just you can call start editing directly, and we're just gonna, if nobody else is reading, we're just gonna elevate your own. Yeah. So now let's make an edit using that write lock that I have. It would be a good idea to show that you cannot really edit if you don't have the write lock, right? You have to have like a start edit session. So now, if I scroll and you see there's an option for session ID, all write operations should have this if it supports branch versioning. Go to the utility network, evaluate attribute rules, even reconcile. Some operation that changes things must take a session ID because it might be undone, right? And we need this session ID to track it, essentially. So now I take this guy and I want to create a new row using our trick here on the version. I want to return the moment, and yeah, let's do it. But before I do that, I want to go to my version info. Let's go to the version info, see that. Because I want to keep track of my
Do you ever get the feeling that you're on the streets of New York in the 30s and there's some guy there, pick the black card. It's a 3-card Monte show up.
I know, right? So keep track of the current moment. 9:23.
23.
Right? That's the version. I'm gonna apply it. I just created a new row in the version through an edit session. If I go back and refresh, 923 did not
now.
change. That means, yes, that means anyone outside trying to query the version without a moment, what do they get? They get just one row, right? Because they are querying on the current moment, which is the moment before I created the second row. Well, how do I get the second row? Well, that's where the edit moment comes very important here. You really need that moment as a client to store it locally, right? I know that I just created a session and I just created a feature or a row. I get back a row, and then I take that moment, and that moment is my current moment, right? So if I query on that perfect moment, then the moment that is not really saved, I'm gonna get 2 rows. But only I can actually see this additional row, right? Because other people who are querying, they are querying always on the current moment, which was not saved, right? When do we actually save? Well, there is a nice operation here called stop editing. Yes, stop editing. And then you pass in the session ID. I just realized this is tedious, huh?
You think? It's killing us watching this stuff.
They're enjoying, seems like.
No, they're not. That's a lie.
All right.
You're gaslighting us.
So I can save this version. Either I say true or false, right? I can say false to discard, true to save. You saw those 2 buttons in Pro? Right? Those are actually all what they do. Save will send a request, stop editing true. Discard will send stop editing false. And let's save. The moment I save now, go back to my moment, I refresh 923 becomes 297. So that's the moment on the version has changed. Anyone reading this version will see the latest and greatest. They don't need to specify a moment. Just querying the version directly will basically give you the latest. I think I'll stop here. That's
Congratulations. That was one of the driest frickin' demos.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Now you know what it's like to be in Esri development on the geodatabase team. This is daily. It's pretty, that was actually quite good. I like that. You showed some very important things there. And the key thing here, and Hussein was hitting this stuff. He was hitting the start editing, start reading, start editing. He was creating a version. He was doing the stop editing with saves. You know, he was just hitting this API, this REST API. You guys have it all. You have access to all this stuff. You can do it that way if you want. Go through REST, or you can do it just through Pro. You can use Pro. Why would you want to do it through REST? Well, I mean, even if you're doing a web app, through our JavaScript API, we've been continuing to enhance the JavaScript API, and even that is now supporting, you know, these operations such that you don't have to worry about typing in raw REST requests and stuff like that in order to utilize version management capabilities, even through a web app, okay? So, slides you can look at later. There's just a bunch of tedious slides I apparently wasted time putting together because of your seemingly never-ending demo. Thank you, Hussein. You can look at this stuff later. It's all just REST and services and REST and services and colorful graphics and boring stuff like that. Very quickly, much as you can get at this stuff through the REST API, if you're writing, say, extensions or tools in Pro, you can use the C# managed SDK inside Pro. And here's a little sort of architectural diagram to show that how we enable the stacks on the client side. Down at the bottom, you have ArcObjects. That's our C++/COM geodatabase implementation. We've created a level of C++ bindings that sit on top of it. That's all part of the native tier. Then C# is communicating to the C++ layer. And then you can write your applications inside C# using the managed SDK. That's the client stuff at the very top. So that's kind of the architectural stack on the client side that you'll be hitting. Okay. Now, okay, you guys know about C#. Yeah, it's good and friendly and fun to use, and all the stuff for version management is exposed in the managed SDK, so you're good there. Here's some more tedious slides that just show some of the classes and methods and operations and whatnot that you would use through the managed SDK. These are in the slides, so you can get them when you get back to your offices next week. Sample code, writing C# code is pretty straightforward. Yeah, it's all logical, no great mystery there. So conclusion, we're about out of time. Why do we do all this? What's the deal with branch versioning? Well, we did it for performance, primarily for performance. Edits are written to a single table. The queries are simpler and more performant. You didn't see the adds and deletes tables and all the various different delta tables and all that and all the unioning going on. No. Queries are pretty simple. You were able to understand 2 different moment queries against default as well as a named version. Administration is simpler. You don't have to compress anymore. Compress, it's nonsensical in this environment. Usability, you can directly edit a version. That's what Hussein was doing actually during his demo. Okay? He did it both with and without an edit session. It just depended upon whether he wanted to have the high isolation or not. Okay, it's all available through REST on the version management server. Trust us, multiple versions can be posted in parallel. And you can track deleted features archivings effectively built in to this temporal model. During conflict management and all the rest, it's nice because you can deal with conflict management across multiple edit sessions. You don't have to do it all at once before you go home. You can spread it out over a couple days if you want. You can share the information with your supervisor. You can say, I've dealt with this one, or I've dealt with this one and I can put a note on it as to why I dealt with it this way, so someone else can review it and go, what were they thinking? Why was that done? Well, there's a note there that you can explain things. So let's see, what other things? Oh, these are future things we're going to be doing. Continuing ongoing performance, quality, scalability improvements. We're always working on that. Hussein was alluding to, towards the end of his demo, some work we're actually thinking at a very, very deep level about how we can make it even more friendly or more usable for client developers, okay? Easier to use through the REST API and all that. Clean up some loose ends that we wanted to make even tighter and better. Look at things such as a version posting queue, be able to block posting of data if, say, you have outstanding errors from your validation service and your attribute rules. There are various different things that we're considering there. Being able to create historical markers inside the version management server. Being able to copy or clone a version. Maybe someone's done some work, they created a version, they've done a bunch of edits in it. Why couldn't I clone a version and all the edits that have made to it? Because I want to create a different variant of that. Okay, that's kind of an interesting concept. We'll then, of course, be adding more support for additional dataset types that are not currently supported. And we're looking very carefully at bitemporal databases. Right now, we're essentially a transaction time database, meaning the database, we're setting the timestamps according to when the transaction occurs. What if it was bitemporal? What if we had a second temporal field that was user time? Or say, I'm doing an edit to my database, and I want to say that maybe I'm building a neighborhood and I'm putting in some pipes or some electric wiring to wire up these houses. And it's going to take 6 months to build this neighborhood. But in the first phase, maybe I want to have some stuff built there. And that's the first month. Second month, do some more stuff. Third month, more stuff. So I'd like to be able to plan and say, in 3 months, and this is all just in my version, I expect something to be present. Well, if it was a bitemporal system, I could say that, well, that power line or that transformer or that water pipe goes into the ground in, say, May. And I'm editing like it's in June, but it's still March. So it's very good for futures when you start thinking about possible different futures and how to sequence work and what you need to be doing to move a very large project forward. So that's what bitemporal is all about. Some QR codes, and we did check them. They actually do work, shockingly. They're not random, and they don't take you to terrible places or anything. We did check them.
I think so.
Some interesting blog posts. Did you write these? Many of these? Any of these? Some of these? And Hussein's a prolific author. And there's more developer doc. And so, okay. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, thanks for coming. Hope you enjoy your week here in Palm Springs.